The military studies weaponized culture. You were in the military.
Now you're using like your metaphors, and we're trying to talk about like logical, concrete issues.
Okay, so this is Spearhead Transmission Fight Night, Thursday night fights, right? Actually, it's not really. I mean, these guys are great guys. They've both been on the Spearhead Transmission podcast a number of times. I think Adam's been on 3 times, and Jay's been on multiple times. He's dealt with our drunk silliness a couple times. So I want to welcome both of you here to the show. And tonight we're going to talk about state versus anti-state. And I'm going to give a brief introduction of we'll go with Adam. Go ahead.
Are you doing the YouTube? I don't see it.
Yeah, it's streaming. It might take a second to kick in. It's going to be behind. Okay. But it'll be there.
Somebody wanted me to send them the link, so I was trying to find the link.
Okay. Yeah. It'll be it takes just a second, I think.
Okay, that's cool. Go ahead, sorry.
Adam Kokesh. Adam Kokesh has been on the Spearhead Transmission a number of times. He's a political activist who's been tackled, arrested for dancing with Thomas Jefferson. He's been raided and locked up for loading a shotgun in D.C. While in the slammer, he wrote a book called Freedom. His book has been banned by the U.S. Department of Justice. He has plans of running for president in 2020 on the platform of a peaceful, orderly dissolution of the federal government. Adam's position is anti-state, and his home site is thefreedomline.com. And we've got Jay Dyer. Jay Dyer has been a guest also on the Spearhead Transmission multiple times. He's a writer, researcher, philosopher. He's dedicated to investigating the deeper themes and messages found in our globalist pseudo-culture, illustrating the connections between philosophy, metaphysics, secret societies, Hollywood, psychological warfare, and comparative religion. Jay has written a book called Esoteric Hollywood and has made many contributions to a vast number of alternative media sites, or fake news, I guess, is what we want to call it, right? And Jay's home site is jaysanalysis.com, and his position is pro-state. All right, guys, so we've already discussed prior to this who would go first. Adam picked the low card, and he got a 7, which was lower than an 8. So he deferred, and he's going to go second in the debate tonight. And the way that it'll work, guys, is that we're going to have a statement of position, which will be 10 minutes each. So Jay will go first. Adam then will go second. Jay will have.
You sent me 20 in the text. Did you want to do 10?
Yeah, we're going to do 10. Let's go 10.
Okay.
But I think 20 is a little long. I think it might be. You're over prepared, right, Jay?
I'm happy to keep this casual. I mean, I love that we have a format and an agenda, but obviously, we're not here to bring this to blows. So, if you go long, I'm not going to complain. And I think if you need to interrupt me and vice versa, we should be able to do that respectfully.
Yeah, that's cool. No, you would beat me in a fight, hands down. So I concede the actual fight.
Oh, look at you guys. Man, you guys are already being too nice to each other. This is not right. I was prepared.
I'm honored, actually. I mean, I've seen him for years. I've watched his stunts, his Alex Jones stuff. I mean, so I feel, it's like a celebrity type thing. So it's very cool.
It is good. It's good to have both.
Hold on. There's celebrity. There's internet celebrity, and then there's like political celebrity, and then there's somewhere down here like internet political celebrity, and I'm in that range. So
how dare you?
So let's be realistic here.
Well, guess where I am then. I'm even below it.
Who are you? I don't remember.
Yeah, exactly. See, there you go. Nobody. But you got two. Two of my favorite guests are on right now, so it's fantastic. All right. So enough of the gentleman niceliness. Now let's get down to blows, right? So you'll have rebuttals, and we won't keep it too formal, like you said, but we'll try to do a couple hours, hour and a half, something like that.
Okay.
Pretty easy.
Sounds good.
All right, man. So,
but you might need to time me because I get lost.
yeah, I will. I'm still gonna.
My mind goes. Yeah.
I'll.
Right.
You want me to give you like? All right, Jay, you've got 2 minutes left.
Yeah, or
like
30 seconds or something like that.
Okay. All right. Cool. Look at that. All right. Are you eating ramen? What are you eating?
That's cultural appropriation. You're using Chinese people's food.
Okay. All right, Jay, you're up, man.
All right, I'll go. So, yeah, I'm going to argue that the state, and I'll even go so far as to say a strong state, is something that is natural to human society and human cultures. So I want to say also from the outset, I'm not defending the United States government by this argument. I'm not defending all actions of every state. I think that part of my case is actually going to be that the United States government is a manifestation of a very strange aberration of melting pot / New World Order experiment in the history of man that is unique. And we get this from a lot of the founders, Francis Bacon and characters like that talk about it as the new Atlantis. So I'm not a fan of American republicanism as a classical, philosophy of how the state should work. I do want to begin, though, with a little bit of a parable just to, as in a fun way, poison the well. So once upon a time, there was an anarcho-libertarian free society, and it was called Kokeshistan. Now, these happy individuals began to work together with each other, and they did certain things that individuals couldn't do on their own. They eventually created a free social contract. They voluntarily incorporated. So meanwhile, however, an equally free group of neighboring anarcho-libertarians in Larkinville built their own private social contract with a different set of voluntarily agreed upon laws. Now, eventually these laws conflicted with Kokeshistan, and both sides decided to form a militia freely to fight. Many within the societies, however, were not interested in fighting. So it was decided by both elected leaders that there would be, in the defense of freedom, the necessity to lie to the public to convince these sovereign citizens to join the war effort. Then it was discovered that both sides had sent spies and infiltrators into their camps to disrupt and confuse the opposing parties and gain information. Both of these corporate governments enacted surveillance laws in order to protect the freedom of the market. So lo and behold, in my argument, it never dawns upon these two free warring societies of voluntary individuals that their anti-state position was merely a state under a differently styled name. Therefore, there is no such thing as a no-state society. Now, granted, individuals can become hermits. They can go into the woods and live as they freely desire. However, in my experience, most anarchists or anarcho-capitalists or whoever, they tend to want to spend a lot of time on the internet, so they don't really like that hermetic existence too much. So I'm going to argue that this position is a fairy tale position insofar as it has never existed in human history, and I don't believe ever conceivably could, precisely because what's at root here is a debate over two different views of human nature or anthropology. So in my view, I don't have a negative view of the human person to the extent that, like, I believe everybody should be beat down or put into slave camps or something like that. But I do believe that when we hear from the anarcho position or the libertarian position, I'm just going to group them together. I'm not trying to be unfair to Adam. I know that he disagrees with certain libertarians. But if we talk about the idea of, say, the non-aggression principle or the anarcho position, generally speaking, what we tend to have is an idea that there is an atomistic individual, right, who is a sovereign citizen free of collective groupings and belongings that lay any kind of moral claim upon him. And I don't think that that's really the case. And I also don't think that Adam or any of the anarcho-libertarian people actually live that way. So my argument's going to be that they actually have two conflicting presuppositions. So I come from a school of presuppositionalism where we critique these conflicting starting points, we might say. Excuse me. So, for example, the non-aggression principle, which I would agree with, but I have a different worldview that brings in things like theological concepts that I believe give a basis for, a grounding for something like a non-aggression principle. However, what I believe the anarcho position does, generally speaking, is that it starts from relativistic assumptions. It starts with a kind of relativism about man's meaning, man's existence, right? The individual is seen as sort of the penultimate definition of what it is to be human, right? And then that individual, because he has no collective obligations or belongings that are like real metaphysical categories, then what happens is it tries to erect an abstract principle, this non-aggression principle, but then so when it forces this on everybody, because it actually tries to make a universal claim, it tries to say that it's universally the case that everyone should adopt the non-aggression principle, right? I mean, I've heard Adam in debates say that like when he was debating with Cantwell, he said, this is what it is to be human. This is human freedom. This is human love. This is the philosophy that he adheres to. The problem is that you can't have both a relativistic philosophy about man, morals, and so forth and so on. And that's what the sovereign citizen anarcho position is. Morally speaking, it's relativistic. But then it turns around and it says that there are universal logical obligations about what you should accept when it comes to something like the non-aggression principle. So secondly, my critique is that the position, and I'm going to state positively my view too. Secondly, I'm going to say that the non-aggression principle is absolutely ambiguous. It's unclear what we mean. Now, granted, Adam will say, and he has many times, that it means that you don't steal people's shit. Like you're not an asshole. You're not a douchebag, right? You don't go and take, you don't take people's stuff, right? You don't steal kids or something. I would agree with that. I agree that that's morally, universally atrocious and wrong. But I don't understand how the arbitrary explanation of what the non-aggression principle is, and that you shouldn't harm people, and this comes out of like utilitarianism in terms of historic philosophy. I don't understand how that can be universally said to be the case. So, in other words, like if I had an anarcho society, if I was a sovereign citizen with my own property, and you were next door to me, right? Just as one example, most of the time that the explanations I hear of what harm consists of, like if I erected giant billboards right next to your kid's sandbox or treehouse, and my giant billboards had like huge dildos attacking, innocent kids and like bestiality on these billboards, like I'm not harming you because it's not physical violence. Now, often when I bring this kind of thing up, libertarians or anarcho-capitalists, they usually say, well, harm can be a lot of different things, right? It can happen in different ways, right? And I agree, it can. So what we've done is we've taken something that is kind of like a soundbite, right? Like the non-aggression, and then we've expanded it into a lot of these other categories, and we've tried to include things that are not immediately apparent. So, I agree, like you shouldn't have billboards right next to, kids' sandboxes with bestiality and dildos attacking, kids and stuff. But I don't understand why that would be wrong on the presuppositions of an anarcho position. So now we have all kinds of examples of things like that we could give that, just like my parable, I think illustrate how a lot of this is unworkable in practice. I mean, it sounds good in theory, but I don't think in practice this is how human societies actually operate. I think that humans literally crave and desire hierarchy. They want authority. They want leaders. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. Another example, if you had this, say, non-aggression principle society that was totally free, people, voluntarily contracting for different things and whatnot, on what basis is it wrong, for example, for a really slick salesman to convince everybody in the society to elect him God Emperor? Like, why would that be wrong if it's freely done, if he's a really good pitch man, right? So like marketing in terms of lying through, false advertising or something like this, like you get all these quandaries that I think rise up from this position, because it starts with the idea that the human individual is completely autonomous, that he's atomized, and that it's up to him to kind of like write his own story and to come up with like the totality of what human history means and what it means to him. And I think that that's completely impossible. We don't write our own story. Adam, for example, I understand that Adam actually was born in a test tube in Galt's Gulch, correct? Like he didn't actually, yeah. Adam did not come from a family. He was actually born in Galt's Gulch, straight out of a test tube.
Okay, you're good.
Hey, Jay, if you would please, I prefer to say that I was hatched. Thank you.
Adam was hatched. Now, most of us, 99.99999% of the rest of us, you know, we have a family and we come from some history and this and that and heritage and all that kind of stuff. So, for example, logic is something that I believe is objective, and that we do learn logic and we use logic and when we debate and so forth, obviously. But even something like logic is not divorced from a tradition, right? So you learn logic, you learn mathematics or geometry that comes down to us, at least, from the Western Greek tradition, right? Of Euclid or Aristotle's syllogisms, right? So this is a tradition that is passed down to us, and I believe that it is objective. I'm not saying it's totally culturally relative, because I'm not a cultural relativist, but it's still, nevertheless, it's mediated to us within history through being part of some tradition, and therefore I don't think it's possible to escape tradition, to actually be the atomized individual sovereign citizen. And I find it ironic, and I'm not saying this is not actually a strictly logical argument, but in my analysis, in my opinion, it is the case that historically speaking, you have two dialectical views that come out of the French Revolution and the Enlightenment, and they are precisely the anarcho position, which with all of its manifestations of like libertarianism and Adam Smith and all these characters. And then you also have this collectivist Jacobin position of like the Illuminists and the communists, right? Within the French Revolution with Robespierre and Danton and these characters. So you have two positions that come out of this pivotal history in the West. And I believe that both of them are dialectical opposites, that they just feed off of each other. So libertarianism and anarcho positions are defined solely by being what in political philosophy we call negative positions. It's all, liberty is defined negatively as not the state, not that thing, against this thing, against that thing. And then it supposedly is left up to the individual to sort of make his own meaning or something. The opposite dialectical position is Marxism, collectivism, and communism. And I think that the irony is that both of them share the same eschatological end times hope of the possibility or faith in creating a future society that we just hope and pray to our reason God will one day come down the road of the stateless society. And that's why Marx and the libertarians share the view of the coming stateless society. I don't think that's accidental. I think that that's because they both spring from the same fount, philosophically speaking, in the West. They also tend to believe in free trade. Marx argued for free trade. And he did this because he thought it would destroy the existing nation states and cultures, and then it would lead to the proletariat rising up or something, right? Now, Marx was wrong about that proletariat stuff, but he was right about the fact that free trade does have the power to open the borders and to destroy existing cultures.
All right, Jay. It's been about 13 minutes and 30 seconds. I don't know.
Okay. You want to go 15? In conclusion, then. Okay. And I could get back to this in the rebuttal. I think that we can look at human history as an example or various exemplars of the fact that societies should and can be constructed on the basis of aristocracy, of hierarchy, and that the unity of a people and a culture is actually more important, and I'll argue this later, but is more important than the idea of an individual being a so-called sovereign citizen operating on a sort of relativistic non-aggression principle.
All right. And that's your opening statement. It's a whole bunch, man. Lots of stuff there. Adam, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
But I got to tell you, Mike, it's almost like Jay cheated already. He's surrounded by all these books and looks so smart. It's like I feel like I need a handicap to make this debate fair. All I have on my side is freedom and logic and reason and a consistent position and all that. And Jay, I do have
and ramen noodles.
Cultural appropriation for the win. I'm also disappointed that you didn't like my dildo billboard plan to take over the world. Like, I mean, come on. Like, you got to see the where that's going. But you spent a lot of time in your opener there misrepresenting my position. I'm kind of glad you brought up your blog post about Kokeshistan, because I think I'm going to rename my property here that. It was Freedom Ranch, but maybe now Kokeshistan.
Okay.
Yeah, it has a ring to it. I like that. And I can declare myself Lord and Emperor for life of my private property here. So let me just start with explaining what libertarianism is to me. It's the idea that as a free, beautiful, independent human being, you own yourself. That is the foundation of ethics and morality. Everybody who tries to put out any kind of moral, ethical system, they usually skip over this premise. But the basic thing to recognize is that you, as an independent consciousness, own yourself. And that means that it is unethical, it is immoral to violate that by aggressing against you, by committing an act of aggression, by in any way imposing my will or anybody else imposing their will on you by force, to violently violate that non-aggression principle that would say, hey, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that. And the cool thing about this is it's really founded in just basic logic and reason as to how human beings interact. If you want to maximize human happiness, you want to eliminate violence and coercion from all human relationships. You don't want anybody to be coerced or forced into an exchange or relationship. But if everybody involved in every exchange is there voluntarily, is free to leave at any time, it means that by staying there, they believe that it's in their best interest. That means everybody gets to do what is in their best interest without compromise, without anybody forcing their will on them. And this means that government, by definition, is unethical and is holding humanity back from achieving this potential of a pure capitalist society where all human interactions are voluntary, are all involved in this free exchange. We're able to maximize the productivity of those exchanges. Now, sidebar here on the definition of capitalism real quick, because it has been so maligned and misrepresented. And if you look at the definition itself in the economic system, based on ownership of the means of production, well, you just have to define means of production properly. The ultimate means of production is not a factory or a tool or a technology. It's the individual human mind. And the only legitimate measure of productivity for you as an individual is human happiness. We want to maximize human happiness. It's not about dollars. It's not about widgets. It's not about the bottom line. It's about you making yourself happy. Human beings pursuing our own rational self-interest without anybody forcibly interfering. Now, one of the things Jay mentioned here is that this is somehow based on the idea that the individual is autonomous. That's absolutely not true. What we want to do is improve human relationships, not separate people, not drive people apart to be more atomized or individualistic. We want human relationships to be more harmonious, more productive, more conducive to human happiness. And this is why government cannot exist in a free society. You can either have freedom or you can have government, but you cannot have both. To be governed is to be controlled, to govern, to control something. And when we talk about the institutions of government or the state, really we're talking about a territorial monopoly on the initiation of violence. It's not okay for me in the United States to go point a gun at your head and say, if you don't give me half your income this year, eventually I'm going to take your stuff or lock you in a cage. But if an IRS agent does it, that's fine. It's not okay for me to go say, hey, I don't like the drugs you're doing, so I'm going to kick down your door and I'm going to go lock you in a cage and ruin your life. It's not okay for me to steal from my neighbor and then use it to buy weapons and go use them on people on the other side of the world and kill people I've never met. You know, don't hit, don't steal, don't kill. These are not, unless you have a gun and a badge or a fancy written law behind you or a politician's orders to go kill brown people on the other side of the planet. These are universal human ethics. And when you do unethical things, you get bad results. And that's what government is. Now, you also have to put this in historical context, because what we're seeing is the evolution towards a free society. This is the inevitable course of human progress. And if you watch too much mainstream news, you might not know that we're living in the most peaceful times in human history. This is not my observation. This is not my analysis. This is Professor Pinker at Harvard, who's not a libertarian, but has shown clearly that we are on just an incredible historical decline of violence over time, that it is getting smaller on pretty much a logarithmic function. And what we're seeing is that means we are living right now in a time when you are less likely to be subject to violence at the hands of another human being than ever before in human history. And when you understand that freedom is nonviolence, what we're talking about is a society of universal nonviolence. That would be the only proper definition of a truly free society. Now, of course, I believe in the right to self-defense, but if you have to defend yourself, it means that someone's violating your freedom. It means that there was some other failure in society to disincentivize that, or to take care of someone so that they wouldn't be in a state of a violent mindset. So we are actually progressing towards this, and it is inevitable that we achieve a stateless society, because that is the pattern of human evolution. Just evolution seeks harmony. Multi-celled organisms beat out single-celled organisms, so on and so forth. You get to the point where human beings who cooperate generally tend to survive and reproduce better than human beings who are fighting. And what we're seeing is this progress in the institutions in society, where we went from caveman days, whoever could pick up the biggest rock was in charge, to feudalism, tribalism, feudalism, monarchies, socialism, oligarchies, to today where we have these modern, you could call them socialist, quasi-democratic, modern Republican forms of government, generally speaking. And I'm very glad that Jay has the presence of mind to not be trying to defend that position, but just the position of the state, which is still really indefensible, because what we're talking about is a monopoly on violence. And as soon as you define government properly, you understand that that's what it is. Now, one of the things, just to address the dildo billboard challenge that Jay raised, he's correct in pointing out that it is not a violation of the non-aggression principle to express yourself, to use freedom of speech on your own property, which would include putting up a billboard that people driving by can see. But the most important thing about libertarianism, or the non-aggression principle, is really how we go about dealing with people we don't like in society. So if someone puts up a billboard on his property that I don't like, I don't have a right to jump his fence and burn it down, but I do have a right to call him out publicly. I have a right to disassociate. This is one of the cool things about real market accountability. When you take the violence out of the way, it almost doesn't matter where that line is, although the line of the non-aggression principle is not subjective. It is very clear, and a very clear set of ethics. However, there is a sidebar on the subjectivity of that in terms of property ownership. It is you, your body, and your justly acquired property. So what constitutes justly acquired property, right? John Locke had the concept that if you mix your labor with natural resources, then a natural object becomes yours, and society should respect it as your property because it contains your labor, which is something that you own as a result of self-ownership. The place where we get to a little subjectivity here is, how much, what quantities, so right here in Arizona, I'm sitting on 10 acres. I put up a fence around 10 acres. I bought it legally, but regardless, I'm homesteading it. It's mine because I say so. Now, generally, I'm very confident that 10 acres of land as a single claim is going to be respected for a long time. However, if I were to go put up a fence around 1 million acres in Montana and say, screw you guys, this is mine, I'm taking all of it, that really wouldn't be the same way, and in a sense, there has to be a certain market subjectivity of what is an appropriate claim to property. So similarly, to get back to the main point here with the dildo billboard challenge, you can ostracize that person, you can cut them off economically. If they are doing other harm, they can be held accountable through means that are non-violent. You don't have to go and burn their stuff or hurt them or violate them. And if you had a society that stuck to those principles, we'd have better accountability than we do today. Right now, if someone puts up such an offensive billboard, what are you going to do? You're complain to government about it? Government's going to say First Amendment, screw off. And because people have come to rely on the government monopoly on justice services, which is a real shame because it means that they're less available to more people, you don't really have much recourse. In a market where we stand up for accountability and transparency, we're not going to have that problem. So I'm really grateful that Jay is engaging in this debate right now and looking at this from a perspective of I hope seeking a greater understanding, because it's clear from his opening statement that he didn't really understand this position. Now, I want to address one specific thing that he said. I have a lot of notes here, but I'll wrap up pretty quickly here. That he said, people naturally want hierarchy, people not naturally want leaders, and that this is natural. Well, natural doesn't necessarily mean good. Like rocket ships and cars and computers and the internet are not natural, but that doesn't make them bad. Rape and murder and war is natural. That doesn't make it good. That doesn't mean we shouldn't look past it. And if people want hierarchy, and Jay, I mean, I don't know, I don't want a hierarchy necessarily, but I'd be, circumstantially being willing to engage in voluntary contracts that might create a kind of hierarchy. If you want that, if you want leaders, wouldn't you want to be able to opt out of that? I mean, what government is doing by saying we have a territorial monopoly, saying your leaders will be chosen for you, and you don't have any ability to opt out. What they say goes, and you are going to be forced into the system. You cannot secede. You cannot break away. You cannot declare that you are free. You are forced into this system. So where we're going with this is escaping tradition. Yeah, we are escaping it. We are evolving it. Tradition is just, it's always been that way, or the habits of behavior. Tradition evolves. Tradition changes. Humanity evolves. Humanity gets better over time. And it is just so exciting right now to be at this incredible point in human history where we see all these things accelerating that are working to make violence and government obsolete. We see communications technology, productivity, connectivity, the ability of human beings to use technology to make more stuff. We see Moore's law, computing power growing on an exponential scale. This is driving this progress. And what we're doing is rendering government obsolete, because government is violence. So when we're talking about making society less violent, that's inevitable. That is the course of human history. That is our destiny. So we're just talking about this next step. If anything, what we've done already is amazing. Holy crap. Look back at human history. We have come so far. I mean, you know why they called the Dark Ages the Dark Ages? They were burning cats for entertainment, witches on stakes. Like, it was some crazy sick stuff. You go back even further, it gets worse. So what we've done as a species is embraced ethics, embraced morality. And all we've done now is we've left this big exception for government and said, well, don't hit, don't steal, don't kill, unless you're government. And what we're doing now is raising the standard of ethics for government. And what we're doing is eventually pushing all of that unethical, violent institution out of the picture entirely to be displaced with nonviolent, cooperative means.
All right. Okay. So time. Excellent. Excellent, guys. All right. So what's that?
What did I clock in at?
You are at 1340.
Oh, right. Exactly with Jay. Perfect.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. Okay, so now we got 10-minute rebuttal. Jay, you ready?
Yeah. So it's a rebuttal, not the Crossfire, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was interesting. A lot of points were made there. I have to point out that when we do debate, when we do this kind of discussion, there are such things as logical laws, and then we have things like fallacies. So while Adam made many good points, and I appreciate his responses, I have to be honest. I can't let some of the fallacies slide. When we say things like progress and the appeal to progress, or the appeal to these sort of mass, the assumptions of like mass popularity or something like this is now what we know to be true, right? Progress in our day is somehow better than some state of affairs 500 years ago or something like that. These are fallacies because they're appeals to emotion, they're appeals to popularity, they're appeals to what is supposed to be like resonating with someone out there to convince you of the case. And that's more in the realm of rhetoric, which is fine. I don't mind the rhetoric, but strictly speaking, those aren't arguments, because it depends on what progress is and whether something like having iPhones or these kinds of things necessarily are progress. Now, if you have like a materialistic perspective, okay, maybe it is progressive, okay, to have an iPhone. But if we consider like damage that's done through things like iPhones to people, which there are arguments to be made for that, and the possibility of people being propagandized through things like the internet, right? Now, I'm not saying the internet's all good or bad, but I'm just saying that when we call these things progress, it really depends upon our value judgments of what we think is a better state of affairs than some other state of affairs. And I don't think that in the anarcho position, we have a coherent basis or explanation of why or how we can say that one state of affairs, one situation, maybe it has more material comforts or something like this, that's objectively a better state of affairs than something else. I mean, in other words, I'm not saying that it's not better. Maybe it is. I believe that it is better. But when you make these sort of like wide appeals to phases of history, as if these were objectively clear patterns of like, oh, that was like the monarchy phase, and that was preceded by like the feudalism phase, and then we got out of, then that was like after the Dark Ages and things like that. Well, the Dark Ages is actually a title that Voltaire, who had a political agenda, gave to an entire period of history. So that's a propagandist statement about a very vast bunch of different societies in human history. So I don't think that it makes sense to really like appeal to these sort of very, very bland phrases of like what a whole period of history was, the Dark Ages. In fact, most of what we live with today comes out of the Dark Ages. The idea of the university, right? These kinds of things come out of the Dark Ages. So I don't find that to be a good argument. Adam started by saying that you have ownership of the self, of yourself, and that's really the key starting point for his position, as I understood him, right? And this is grounded in ethics and morality, what it means to be ethical in our day, and that this is an evolving process. So if it's an evolving process, what I want to know is if ethics and morality are also subject to the evolving process. If it is, if that's the case, then it's entirely possible that 1,000 years from now, it will evolve to be the opposite of that, right? So the non-aggression principle will be weeded out of this supposed evolutionary process, right? If everything is in the evolutionary process. I don't believe that it is, right? But Adam argues that tradition is always evolving. It's always a purely historical manifestation. Now, he says that the imposition of the non-aggression principle is something that you can't force on other people. One of the objections that I raised in my opening statement was that force is not just physical. There's also the conception of logical force. So Adam believes that his non-aggression principle, his conception of it, his philosophy of it is I take him to say it's universally the case. He uses these phrases of universal and things like this, right? So he believes that it has logical force, that you should accept it. But what I want to know is that how, if this position is grounded in the self and the individual's own, you could almost argue, taste and happiness, why do I have to accept the non-aggression principle? Now, you're going to say, I think, I don't have to accept it in like a force sense. You're not going to come here and like beat me over the head and make me accept the non-aggression principle. I understand that, but there's another kind of force, which in debate or argumentation we call the force of logic, logical force, logical necessity, right? So anytime you make a universal claim and you say that this is the case, the non-aggression principle is universally true across human cultures, this is what humans want deep down to be happy, that's a universal claim. Now, that's a tall order. Now, maybe Adam can justify that, but what I've heard so far doesn't justify it for me in the anarcho position. And so that's why, and I want to say too that I have done my best. I've tried to read as many of the anarcho-libertarians as I could over the years. And so, I mean, I could give you a list of all the different characters, everybody from the libertarians of the von Mises school and the Austrians and Henry Hazlitt and Tom Woods and all these, and Ayn Rand and all these different characters. But these are the sort of core problems that I see. So what I want to know is that when Adam talks about all these categories of things like your mind is your own, right? Mind is in at least historically in philosophy, something different than the brain. The brain is the gray matter. So the mind assumes some sort of like consciousness. And so we're getting into the territory of like metaphysics. Now, how do we have these kinds of things if the worldview that Adam's espousing, I take it to be a very, he's using the terms evolution, right, very, very clearly. Is this mind just something that is all that evolved? Now maybe it did. Okay, so maybe that's Adam's position. I don't know what he thinks about that. But what I don't understand is that if humans are themselves stuck within or smushed within the historical process of evolution, right, and that the non-aggression principle supposedly arose out of a totally flux, totally chaotic history of evolutionary process, how in the world this could be an objective principle that's universal for people across the board, because that brings back in things like metaphysics and all those things that we thought we were going to get rid of out of the Dark Ages. Now, maybe Adam doesn't agree with that, but what I understand from most of the modern Darwinian, reductionist, materialist type philosophers, they tend to now, they don't even believe in mind. Okay, so mind isn't even a category anymore. That's like the soul and angels and this kind of stuff, right? So then the debate becomes consciousness in the history of the philosophy of science. And we don't really have consciousness. We can't prove it. It's not under a microscope. We can't show it, right? So we're talking about all these things and assuming that they're so. But my argument is just simply that on that worldview, right? And this is the basis of Adam's whole position when it comes to things like he mentioned freedom. He mentioned the individual person. How are we supposed to believe an individual person has freedom if there's no clear understanding of what a person is, right? A person is like a philosophical category. A self is what he called it, right? A self, the individual self and the self's mind and things like this, right? So these are, I believe, metaphysical categories, but the entire position that Adam comes from and people in that perspective come from is from the outset, it tends to be very often an anti-metaphysical position. It starts by saying metaphysics is old stuff. We got rid of that with Hume and with Kant. We don't have that stuff anymore. Now we have science, we have progress, we have empirical investigation and this kind of stuff, right? So again, my main argument here is just simply that I don't think we can understand the non-aggression principle and that it means, as Adam said, non-violent means, right? He mentioned the example of the pervert, right, who lives next door and who's so you said I believe that there are non-violent ways to deal with the pervert. What if the pervert is flashing his dinghy to your kids, right? What if it goes beyond merely having the billboards? I mean, what if he's like really, really, really perving out after your kid, right? So, and I agree with you. That doesn't prove that we need the state to like come in and solve the situation. My argument is just that the non-aggression principle itself is very problematic, and I don't think can function as a coherent, universal claim. Where am I at on time? I don't know where I'm at.
30 seconds. 30 seconds, perfect.
So the last argument I have, and this is another, I think, one of my stronger arguments, is Adam talked about moving towards a less violent society in modernity. What I want to know is, even if, so let's say the non-aggression principle is true, or in terms, let's take your argument. Why should I not be violent, right? If we're all part of an evolutionary process, why should I not just be the Nietzschean Übermensch and like nuke everybody and stamp out whoever I want if it's all just part of the flux of history? I don't see anything binding me to morally accept the non-aggression principle as opposed to like the mega ultimate aggression principle. Like, why should I choose one or the other? On what basis?
All right, 10 minutes.
All right. I got so many bullet points here. I don't even know where to start. But with that last one there, I might as well jump in, about this, why not just be violent? It might be in my own self-interest. Well, the question is, do you want to be that, isolated individual who's not going to have positive relationships with anybody, who's going to have violent relationships? It's like, if you're violent to other people, people are going to want to be violent to you. In this case, it's just an observation of reality. Violence isolates people. Violence pushes people apart. Violence is bad for human relationships. You know, we want, as I said, human relationships to be voluntary and cooperative. So if you want to be that violent person, odds are it's, you know, there might be some short-term benefit, but it's really not in your best interest unless you want to be that, you know, autonomous individual. But humans aren't like that. That whole theory is based on what you would say is contrary to human nature, that we really are, you know, communal species. And that's really important to recognize here. So to get back to your Kokeshistan, I was just looking for an excuse to say that again, Kokeshistan. One more time, to get back to your Kokeshistan example, you say that they, you know, what if they create a free social contract? You know, it really shows a misunderstanding of what we're talking about here with voluntary hierarchies or voluntary collectivism or voluntary groupings of people where they have the choice to leave at any time. The idea of a social contract is, well, you didn't sign it, but because you're in this general geographic area, it's going to be imposed on you. This is clearly unethical, clearly bad for human relations, clearly an opportunity for somebody to take advantage of someone else. If, oh, I can write a social contract and it doesn't matter if you signed it or not, I can impose it on you. And the other thing is, you say like this is a fairy tale because it's never existed. Well, if I went back in time just 40 years ago and said, hey, we're all going to be connected with devices in our pockets that have the computing power of this room-sized computer here, and they're all going to be connected on this thing called the internet, you know, yeah, it's a fairy tale. That's never existed. But if you want to look at where we're going as a species, where the world is headed, you got to look at where we've been. This is not an appeal to progress or popularity or emotion. This is an appeal to the evidence of history, to the clear and present trends that we haven't just seen throughout history, but that we are experiencing acceleration of right now. Human nature, as you point out, is really the foundation of this. Every human has an individual will. You know, you said, what is a person? Well, a person is an individual human. And when that human has an individual will, it wants to be respected. No one says, well, my will is this, but I really want someone to come and just punch me in the face and interfere with me expressing my will. Because even then, the moment they say that, then their will is to get punched in the face. So it's by definition of being a consciousness with a will, with a desire, with wants and needs, and existing in a physical body that seeks to get those needs met. So should everyone adopt the non-aggression principle? Yes, but like I said, it's important to point out that it's a principle. It's not a law. There are important principles behind this, like self-ownership and the things that go along with that. But the idea of it being a principle, like, hey, it's more about responsibility for your actions and how we should deal with bad actors in a society. So, like, if you're choking and I give you the Heimlich maneuver, I've violated the non-aggression principle, but I'm responsible for that action. I always think of that scene from Arrested Development. I don't know if I'm dating myself with this, but when Dr. Tobias Funke goes and thinks that a dude taking a nap at the pool is choking, and he goes and like breaks a couple of his ribs trying to give him the Heimlich maneuver. And it's like, well, if he was choking, you'd be a hero, but since he's not choking, you're freaking on the hook for that, you know? And he's held responsible. I think that's how he loses his license. So, you know, there is a way to deal with anything that goes on like that when we can be rational, when we can step back and go, how do we deal with this? There's, you know, with the exception of a clear and present threat. And now I would go and make the case that if someone is, you know, standing on the side of the road and exposing himself, you know, that's probably someone, you know, you want to take a picture, you want to report it, you want to make sure that that guy's held accountable. Yeah. But when if he's in your face, if he's like in your face with your kids, now we're talking about like he's impeding your physical progress. That's a physical, forceful violation of your right to freedom of movement. So you absolutely are righteous in that position, according to the non-aggression principle, to forcibly remove him from your way, to push him out of the way, to stop that, even, you know, because it's more than just a visual assault at that point. So there is this concept in the nature of self-defense that it's not just, you know, when the guy draws and points his gun at you, but when there is a clear and immediate present physical threat or violation of your rights, it is absolutely justified to use violence in defense or retaliation there. So in this sense, the logic behind this is entirely objective, and it's based on the nature of the independent human consciousness. But market value, as Adam Smith got wrong in his labor theory of value, market value is subjective. And so there really is some subjectivity in how we go about this. And what we see when we reject violence, how we deal with people is on a spectrum from we give them money to pay them for their goods and services to we completely ostracize them and we want to have nothing to do with them. But there's, a whole range in between that we get to exercise that determines what the relationships based on people's reputation in a society are going to be. So this can be defined absolutely in a positive sense. We can say freedom is what you have when no one is forcing their will on you in any way. And that would be, as Jay points out, a negative definition. But it's also a situation in which your individual will is respected, in which you're able to flourish in the world in without that forcible interference. So in that sense, whether it's positive or negative, it can be defined either way. And now you mentioned about achieving a free society. I think in this sense, there really is an objective definition of progress, because when we talk about a free society, it's a universally nonviolent society. So progress is we become less violent, very clear. Now, again, this is universal. This is universal to having an independent consciousness with a will. Humans want their will respected. You asked about the non-aggression principles, concept of ethics and morality evolving. No, those are not evolving. The non-aggression principle has always existed as a principle to maximize the happiness in relationships between independent conscious creatures. It's sort of like the Pythagorean theorem. It existed before humans did. We just discovered it. And when it comes to morality and ethics and the non-aggression principle, we're simply getting better over time in applying them. So I think I've covered everything, so I yield the balance of my time.
Oh, all right. So in the rebuttal, I mean, basically, one of the things that I think we have to figure out, at least sort out, maybe going forward, because otherwise it'll be kind of a point of contention. But as far as what a person is, right? Like, I mean, we really don't have much to go on other than this physical body that we are, right? So, I mean, I think we kind of have to agree.
Human consciousness.
Right. I mean, so otherwise, I think the debate or the arguments will get veered off, and it may, I mean, maybe unless that's the way you guys want to go, but I think we kind of have to have at least a concrete explanation of what people are, right?
Well, that is it. My turn.
Yes, you got. Yes,
well,
you did. Okay.
Before we get into this next section, can we establish at least a sort of direction for this? I mean, it's supposed to be asking questions, so maybe we just take turns, and take your time asking a question, and I'll take my time answering, and then I'll turn one around on you.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I think we're at the interrogation.
That's what we're at right now. We're at the Crossfire section, right? To sound like we're big time. And Nick's here, so
yeah, I'm here, so this show can get started.
So what I'd like to do in that is a back and forth. So I'm going to have the lead in the questions for this section, then you'll have the lead in the questions to me. So I have a series of questions I've written out for you.
Okay. Sure.
So the first one I have is, you talked about the individual, and the individual is not an isolated individual, and you talked about it being wrong to be violent against individuals. What I want to know, and you give a very good sort of prosaic defense of the position that you hold to, but what I want to know is why it's objectively wrong to violate the non-aggression principle, beyond just simply the fact that it's your subjective tastes, right? That you don't want that violated. But what I want to know is why it's wrong.
Well, there's an assumption behind this. You're correct to point out that I am assuming it is a universal human desire to have your will respected, to be happy, to not have violence used against you. I am happy to concede the point that this is not objective, it is subjective. So it's not that violence is wrong, non-violence is good. It's if you want human happiness to be maximized, if you want productivity to be maximized, then the less violence you have, the more happiness and more productivity you will have.
Okay. So that principle that you talked about, that you're mentioning there, it's not subject to the human evolution.
I think
I took you to say that it wasn't a subject to evolution.
Right. I would say that that concept is not really subjective to evolution. I would say that that's true about if you had an alien species of, independent conscious aliens who could interact and communicate, that for them, they're going to maximize their happiness and productivity by not having violent conflicts between each other, that they're going to maximize their values in their society by cooperation rather than conflict. Yes.
So,
it's more like game theory, it's sort of a universal principle of game theory between independent, conscious, carbon-based life forms.
How do you know which abstract universal principles like that are not subject to human evolution, but humans arose out of evolution, and all the societies and cultures of the past were in this flux and changing? How do you know which things you stick in the eternal verities category and which things are subject to flux and never changing? Because I agree with you that that's not subject to flux, because I believe in the non-aggression principle. But what I want to know is, on your worldview, how we're supposed to accept the other aspects of your belief system and that thing. So how do you know? How do you know which things are which? Or what's the benchmark or judgment that we make here? How do we make these judgments?
By your own logic and reason and evidence. I can't say that I am any kind of expert in the philosophical delineations of, why is the Pythagorean theorem, a timeless concept, and why is, the study of a certain species that exists right now not in the same sense. But obviously there's a certain nature of these timeless principles that they exist because of logic and reason. And I think it's very easy to logically deduce from the concept of an independent consciousness that has a will, that lives in a carbon-based form, that if it wants to be able to meet its needs, that if it's a communal species, that it's a universal principle, it's a timeless principle, because it would be true. You kind of test it. I guess it's one of those things. You can give it the logic test. You can give it the reason test. It's like, at what point does a scientific theory become law, right? At what point did we know that it was, the law of gravity versus the theory of gravity? Well, eventually you test it enough and it holds true, right? And I think if you have no logical reason to doubt something, if it holds water in that sense, and every single situation you apply it to, it's true, then I think then we can know with as much certainty as we can anything that's true.
So the way that we test this is that we look at societies and we see what works and what maximizes happiness.
Well, it's kind of then you get into a lot of subjective interpretation, and that's where it's very difficult. And you talked about the utilitarian rebuttal of this, and saying that it was utilitarian. In a sense, it's sort of like, let's look at the principles that lead us to the greatest outcome. Let's look at all of the totality of evidence and try to tease out what is the core principle that maximizes human happiness and productivity and so on. And so that's I think how you would derive the non-aggression principle.
But I took you to be saying that we know that it's a universal principle objectively, because we can test it and see that it works. But how do you ever get a universal principle from finite experience testing things? And that's what I'm trying to say, is that you can't get that when you have humans being the result of just a continual evolutionary process. Well, so in other words, it's
just like I said, I said you can know this with as much certainty as you can know anything. I think, therefore I am. Therefore I know that I am an individual consciousness. Therefore I know that I want to think. But because I want, I know that I have desires. The nature of desire is to seek a fulfillment of something. So I know that I have wants that I am better off with, I am happier with when they are fulfilled. And I'm more likely in every situation to get those needs fulfilled when no one is using violence against me.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's the constant use of value judgments where we say what's better, what helps, what's progressive. And what I'm saying is, it's not just the non-aggression principle, there's a whole bunch of other things that start to be tacked onto this that are eternal verities and truths. So what I want to know is how is it that we're supposed to think that your conception of what progress is progressive? So I mean, you're throwing the terms out that we've progressed now, and I'm saying that's a value judgment, and that then also has to be part of this category that you can say is objectively the case, right?
Well, the value is human happiness. The value is nonviolence. So yeah, those are my assumptions.
Okay, but what I'm saying,
I don't want to assume that humans want to be happy. Hey, I think you're the one denying human nature then.
Well, there's but okay, so let's take the phrase human happiness. That's very ambiguous. Like, should we, and you can see this fleshed out actually in the utilitarians who argued about this, right? So for example, should we maximize an individual's happiness in terms of like quantity, or excuse me, in terms of quality? Like, is one guy's like mega super happiness, right? Like, does that outweigh the happiness of a whole bunch of people? Right now, I'm bringing this up because it's a debate that the utilitarians had that they couldn't seem to solve, because there's no way to know whether it's better to choose the mass of people and a little bit of happiness, or like one dude having like a super mega orgasm that's like the greatest happiness ever. Like, how do you judge which one of these is the correct maximized happiness, right? So in the utilitarians thought, oh, well, you could do moral calculus. We can actually come up with a calculus program, an algorithm by which we can say that this equals human happiness over against the other one. So in other words, human happiness is a very, very ambiguous category. What if a dictator gets an extreme amount of happiness, or the Nietzschean Ubermensch individual gets a lot of happiness out of like sadomasochism or something like that, or not sadomasochism, but like torturing people, like that gives him a whole bunch of pleasure. Like why in other words, we start to see that there's a whole bunch of categories that also are included in the eternal verities, it seems to me.
Okay, so this will Adam, you can answer this question, and then we'll move on to the next portion where you'll ask him questions.
Well, I'll just say that if I'm waiting for the dictator to, invent the mind control orgasm machine where he's just going to be able to like zap everybody with orgasms all the time, and we'll totally be, his loyal subjects. Although, you know what, there is a woman, I remember seeing this story, who like had uncontrollable orgasms all the time, and it ruined her life. So clearly, that would not be the definition of happiness. But
that's actually any of my ex-girlfriends.
That's not what she said. Anyway, so yeah, you're right to point out that in a sense, we don't know what is maximizing human happiness for someone other than ourselves. We really only live in our own heads. So in that sense, I would say you better respect someone else deciding what that is for themselves. Okay.
But to me, that seems subjective.
Okay, we can we can continue this after the next 10-minute segment. We'll Adam, it would be your turn to ask Jay questions.
All right. Well, I'm having a bit of a hard time with this section because I feel like Jay has not put out a lot of positions to try to justify the existence of a state or any kind of government at all. Although he has said that he doesn't agree with the sort of modern current concept of a state. Like I said, I very much respect that. So I would just say, Jay, like, what is your definition of government?
Okay. So I would say that when we look at things like the family, we see maybe a miniature version of what we've called the state is kind of a maximized version of that, historically speaking. I'm not saying by that all the states that have existed within history are good. But I think that within a religious or theological worldview, that it is possible to be able to have the kinds of objective standards that you have continually talked about and sort of intuitively want to have and use, which I totally agree with. But I don't see why on the kind of, and I'm not trying to get too theological here, but on a kind of maybe agnostic or atheistic or Darwinian, blah, blah, blah type of perspective, I don't really see why there's any logical force that should compel me to accept those things and give a damn about anybody else's fucking happiness. I mean, if it's a materially evolving universe, I just don't see why I should.
The question.
Huh?
You're avoiding the question.
So what is my view? So my view is that
definition of government.
Well, the word means to like rule the ship, like to like steer the ship, rule the people, right? So I in other words, like the father of a family, I don't have any problem with that being extended out to a larger society with a king. So I think monarchy works good. This is what humans have tended to do throughout history. And then in a larger sense, empire. I believe in an imperium.
So would you say that it's a good family if when the kids grow up, they're not allowed to leave the house?
You mean like literally they can't leave the basement, or what do you mean? They have to live at home?
No, or they have to live at home. They're forced to live at home and pay for expenses in the house and let their father or mother continue dictating how their lives are run. I mean, is that your idea of a good, just, loving family?
No, I think that within the context of a fuller worldview, no, there's phases of life where you move out of the house and you get married and have kids, or you don't, or whatever. So of course not.
So, I mean, shouldn't humanity be able to grow up and eventually be able to strike out on its own as individuals and create their own families and not be violently maintained in this collective, subjective family concept of a government that you're advocating for now?
Right. Well, if human beings weren't fallen, then I would say yes. But unfortunately, they are fallen. And so they tend to have a lot of problems that can't be solved merely through external stimuli or pressures. And so therefore, humans have seen fit to erect communal ideas, right, and principles by which they execute justice. And ultimately, I believe that the grounding for that is theological and divine. So it's wrong to hurt people because they're made in the image of God.
But your concept of a government is something that takes a unique monopoly on the right to hurt people. Is that correct?
Except for cases of self-defense, yes.
Okay, so you're talking about a theological concept of justice. Do you mean that you can punish people for disobeying God's law? You can physically assault and hurt people for violating God's law?
Yes, there are cases where divine law would exact justice, even self-defense itself. For example, in Exodus, there's the discussion of a person entering your house at night, and you have the right to kill that person. So it's a basic sort of self-defense principle, and I believe that that's extended to the bigger societies. Like, so if a neighboring tribe or kingdom is going to come against you, absolutely you have the right to self-defense and to kill them.
Right, but I mean, would you you talk about like stoning gay people or adulterers or things like that?
I believe that there should be judicial penalties for the public promulgation of those kinds of things. Yes. And there have been in the history of like Western civilization and even in Eastern civilizations too.
So you don't trust God's justice?
No, I believe that God has initiated and ordained rulers. I mean, this is pretty consistent throughout the Bible, and I do defend like biblical theism. No, God has ordained rulers for the execution of justice. I mean, this is pretty consistent, in Mosaic texts and then into the Christian period as well.
So Donald Trump and Barack Obama were given to us by God to rule us. Is that what you're saying?
No, I said in my opening salvo that I was not going to defend the American Democratic Republic.
Right, but there are rulers, and if you believe in God, God put them here. God gave them to us to be our rulers.
So you're asking the question of legitimacy, and I believe that historically there is a theological argument to be made for the imperium being the legitimate authority. So this is a hairy question because it gets into really deep theology, and I don't mind answering that or dealing with that. But yes, the history of the church is actually where you get the authority for the ruler.
How do you know what is true and what isn't?
Because I have a theological worldview that I believe is demonstrable and provable objectively.
So if something is objectively demonstrable and provable, that's how you know it's true or not.
Yes, and I think that everybody operates this way. This is how you were arguing as well in your argumentation. So we share that same position. It's just that we differ on our starting points.
So you believe that the Bible is absolutely true, direct word of God?
Yes, except for there are in some places what we call typos or scribal errors. But yes, the texts themselves are inspired. Yeah.
Who wrote the Bible?
Apostles, prophets.
How was it decided what books were part of the Bible and what weren't?
Well, the Jewish scribes decided the Old Testament, and then the Christian church took over with the coming of the Messiah to determine that through the imperial church.
So it was fallible men who decided what was the word of God and what constitutes objective truth and what you accept then as objective truth.
No, actually, it was, we would say, divine providence and using men, right, to bring together the documents and inspiring them to write them. And so in the same way that, for example, if I say 2 + 2 is 4, it's infallibly true. I believe that God has the ability to give us objective truth. So God guided them objectively to do those things, and they had certainty about what they were doing. And in the same way that you and I can have a conversation about objective truths, and I believe that they're absolutely true, right? It's no different than the truth, the truth property, the truthfulness of what they did and what they wrote is no different than the kind of truth properties of what we're talking about with like 2 + 2 = 4 or something.
I think the word you're looking for is truthiness.
Truthiness.
Yes. But then do you believe that the historical record as presented in the Bible is the truth?
Yes, except for depending on what you mean, like there are times when there are allegories. So like I'm not going to say that, like when Isaiah says that God comes into Egypt and the heavens will fall or something like this, like that's prophetic language or allegory. But yes, absolutely, I believe that the text can be defended in their historical presentations.
So did God put dinosaur bones here just to trick us? Test our faith?
That's an interesting question. There's 2 ways you could go with dinosaurs. If they do exist, then the latter chapters of Job seem to describe what could be a dinosaur or a large lizard. And I think most even secular scholars believe that Job was written a long damn time ago, even if we don't know the exact date. So if the latter chapters 38 to 42, somewhere in there, are describing this giant sort of dinosaurish scaly character, if dinosaurs do exist, then that's the case. But I also consider the possibility that dinosaurs could be a complete fraud, because if you look at 1984, just as a starting point example, O'Brien tells Winston that the Ministry of Truth has created dinosaurs and that they can enforce that and everybody will believe it simply because they're the Ministry of Truth. Now, I'm not saying that proves that dinosaurs are false, but when you actually get into the history of why were there no dinosaurs that the Indians discovered, why did no ancient cultures ever discovered dinosaurs until like the turn of the century, 1900. So I would consider that like an open question as to whether there are dinosaurs. And actually, when you look at a lot of the supposed fossils and this kind of stuff, so many of these have been discounted as forgeries that I find that a very weak point of contention, honestly.
Okay, so one more question, Adam, and then we'll move on.
Oh, hold on! I got a quick series. I got to do this quick series.
Quick.
I was getting to get into carbon dating, but
we were getting into dinosaurs. I mean,
all right, real quick though, is the Easter Bunny real?
No.
Is Santa Claus real?
No.
Is the Christian God real?
Yes.
How do you know the difference?
Because the type of thing that we're talking about, the type of being that we're talking about, is completely different from the type of things that you listed. So the way that I'm going to go about proving or demonstrating the existence of that being. So if we talk about, let me say, if we talk about a being that we say,
if I may, just to be clear, I'm not saying God. I describe myself as a pantheist, so okay. I by definition, believe in God. but the specific Christian
Right.
God of the Bible of hate and discontent and fire and brimstone and punishment and all the pain and torture of the Bible. How do you know that that is true and that the other Christian mythologies of the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus are not?
Right, I understand. So I would argue what's called a transcendental argument, and this is a kind of approach from a logical perspective that we've seen Aristotle use. So when Aristotle's at one point approached by some sophists, and they say, Aristotle, how do you know that the principle of non-contradiction is true? Because what if I just say, I don't believe logic, I don't believe in the principle of non-contradiction? And Aristotle says, I will make a transcendental argument to, by reductio, prove that this principle is true. And so he says, if you argue against the principle of non-contradiction, you're assuming the very thing that you're arguing against. And so he says that is one of the strongest proofs for the principle of non-contradiction. So it's called, in logic and in philosophy, I'm not making this up, by the way, so this is in the branch of logic, it's called a transcendental argument. It goes all the way back to Aristotle or even earlier. I would say that when we argue for God, that it's that kind of an argument. I'm not saying that God literally is the principle of non-contradiction, but I'm saying that when we argue for things like objective metaphysical categories, like mathematical principles or truths or geometric proofs, right? These kinds of things, they don't exist, or they're not dependent upon the physical world. They're in some way mental categories or abstract. But that doesn't mean that they don't have any existence, right? So in the same way that we can talk about things that we don't necessarily see in our day-to-day with our senses, with our eyes or smell or touch, like a Mandelbrot set, for example, this is a real mathematical principle that it took computers actually with the processing power to show us this kind of a mathematical principle. God is that type of kind of thing. Like it's those things are analogies or analogous to what we would talk about when we talk about God. Jorg Cantor, for example, he talks about multiple infinities, right? And this is a mathematical argument he makes. You get Kurt Gödel, for example, famous mathematician. He argues with set theory that you can only show set theory to be coherent with some kind of transcendental argumentation. And I'm saying that in theology, we do the same thing. So I show the coherence of this worldview and this position, and that's my strongest argument. And by contrast, when we examine the position that you or any atheist or any Darwinist or whoever might have, and we show that that position is totally incoherent from its grounding presuppositions, like I believe that it makes sense why there's objective metaphysical principles, because there is a God and there is, right and wrong, and it applies across the board. But I don't understand why on a position that is yours, like, for example, liberal individualism, right? This is a manifestation of the cultural history of the West. Like when you say that that should be universal, how is that not a cultural like foisting upon the rest of the world, right?
Hold on, before
Mike, if I may just respond before we move on, okay. I'll keep this quick. I really appreciate it. If you believe in a God that wants you to do violence against peaceful people, wants you to trust your judgment to do his will, then I concede the argument. Sure, you want to do violence against peaceful people, you need a government. However, I reject the premise. I reject your assumption that this God exists, that there is an all-powerful being that wants you to do his justice and wants you to do violence against peaceful people because they don't obey his rule. I refuse to accept the existence of that particular deity. Okay.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're gonna continue the second half of this debate, and I think one thing that I want to get down to is, I think this is kind of how it naturally progresses generally, anyways. And I want to ask two questions. I want to ask Jay a question. I want to ask Adam a question, and I just want one word answer, please, like yes or no. Okay. So Jay, by nature, is he good or is he bad? I guess you can answer good or bad. Is natural. Now, you stated earlier that he's fallen, right? So is he good or bad? natural tendencies?
Nature is good. He has a tendency towards corruption.
Okay. Adam, same question.
Man is bad, woman is good. Wait, no. Sorry, take that back. No, neither.
Okay. So out of the, I think what kind of we're getting down to, and I, at least from what I pulled from both of you, is that, Jay, whenever you made the state or the position for government, you said that man was fallen, right? Because he had, and he needs that to kind of to fix those problems that he has. And everything that any kind of interview that I've done with Adam before, and it's very influential in this setting, is at least for this anti-state, is that he's always stated that free, beautiful, intelligent individuals, right? And that would lead me to believe that he believes that they're good. Now, he didn't say that, but me coming from a anti-state position, I tend to always believe that that man is naturally good. And I do believe that if you have choice, it ultimately boils down to choice. And if you have your long-term self-interest in mind, you'll follow that good path. If you don't really care, you tend to go towards corruption. So it could be neither. But I would want to make a point that it seems that when we get down to this, and it gets down to a theological debate, because that's kind of where it goes, right? I think it's the outlook of how man is, like what we view man as good or bad. And I don't know. I don't know if we want to go any further in that, or if I know that we got another 2 10-minute sections of Crossfire, so it'll be Jay gets to ask Adam now, and then vice versa. Or go ahead.
Wait, no, we're done with the Crossfire, but if I may respond to what you said there, Mike. It's not whether I don't think Jay's argument for the state is not that humanity is fallen or however he would describe it in theological terms, and therefore we need the state. But he would say because of God's command to punish people for violating his law, therefore we need a state. So I think you might be conflating that and trying to put an undue logic burden on Jay with that, because he's not really making that position. He's saying that because God wants this, therefore we should carry it out. Is that fair, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, the question of human nature, in our belief, nature across the board is good. It's inherently good. So when God created in Genesis, he pronounced it good. So it's all good. We believe that evil is a kind of negation. It's a kind of privation or parasite on good. So it's not a thing that has like substantial existence. And we say that because we don't want to bring any kind of like Manichaeanism or Zoroastrianism in, where there's like two competing eternal principles of good and evil. There's not. Evil is merely a move of the will away from the good, we would say. So we believe that the state was instituted merely as a protective, so that humans, as a good thing, so that humans could have justice within various social orders, right? So this is the presentation in Genesis of why at a certain point after the fall, God says to Noah in the Noahic covenant that you can now have the death penalty. So prior to that, there was no explicit statement of the death penalty. And so that's like, if you look at the Cain and Abel story, for example, that was wrong. Like, Cain's not supposed to kill Abel. So because of the fall, I'm just saying in our view, I'm not saying this is a proof, I'm just stating what the position is. The state is instituted as a protective measure, as a means by which there can be elders or king or something like this, right? Which you see with Solomon, and David. And they're actually, in the biblical tradition, they're more so like judges. So the people bring their cases to the king or the elders, and they make judgments. And we believe that there's nothing wrong with that. And it's just a larger extension of what happens in the family. with the father at least having, for the most part, authority until, a designated age and something like this. So it's not that there's no inherent evil within a human being.
Okay.
It's rather that because of the fall, we tend towards these vices. So in my view, and this is what I think is the strongest argument, I'm not saying that I can absolutely with apodictic certainty prove every single position that comes out of my worldview, but I believe that it makes sense why there is, in our view, like right and wrong, and why you shouldn't do these things. Right.
I'm just reminded of the quote, I love your Christ, but not so much your Christians. And I know, apologies to whoever I'm even forgetting that came from, but the idea that Christ wanted you to turn the other cheek, to be forgiving, to be accepting. And I think if there was a real historical figure of the Christ, then he would want people claiming his name as their religious founding right now. He would be very disturbed that people are saying, well, God says it's okay to use violence against peaceful people and to punish them, so we're going to do that, as opposed to follow the actual peaceful teachings of Christ.
Okay. Well, actually, in our view, the teachings of Christ, like in Matthew 5 or like the Sermon on the Mount, you can't like take those things outside of the whole context of like the big worldview. So for us, it's a whole like package deal. So, for example, there's all kinds of things in the law or the Old Testament where even within the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says that none of the law will pass away until heaven and earth pass away. So we don't actually like toss away all of these principles that are in like Jewish law. We think that they have a principle, like a case law, for example, in Deuteronomy. They have a principle that's applicable to modern day in our theological worldview. Now, that has fleshed itself out in the history of the church in the last 2,000 years in a lot of different ways, and it's transformed society. So now I understand that there's a lot of bad things that have happened within the last 2,000 years, but there's also a lot of good things. Let me give you an example. We would say that the dignity of the human person, which you believe in and which you talk about, that is actually a theological position. Like, we believe that because man's made in the image of God, you don't have the right to like violently aggress on a person unless that person poses some kind of threat to the social order. And that's why we believe that you have certain principles, like, so you mentioned like perversion, like homosexuality or something like that. We believe that if that propagates within the society, it's self-destructive to the society. And we actually... No, I understand that, but let me give an example.
Propagate gayness. You don't like have sex with someone when you're gay.
No,
like,
that's not actually. That's not true. That's not true. I know that like individual interactions don't propagate the gayness. It's not a disease. But what I'm saying is that you can, through the cultural manipulation, through toxic culture, you can weaponize sexuality. So there's a 1969 Population Council memo from Bernard Berelson to Planned Parenthood. And he lays out in this document, public, you can find it, Rockefeller document. He lays out the strategy of weaponizing homosexuality, abortion, all these other things, drugging the water, right, as means to achieve depopulation. So actually homosexuality can be and is weaponized.
I'm just the reason I was laughing is I was thinking about the popular memes where it's a picture of Jesus on a mountain somewhere, talking to his subjects, and he says, "Love thy neighbor," and the guy goes, "But what about the gays?" And and then Jesus says, "Did I stutter?" It's just, no, love thy neighbor, and that's the basis of freedom. That's the basis of my ethics. Is you have to love and respect that individual will to embrace it. But I'll take it to Mike if you want to.
Yeah, so we've got a ton of questions.
I would say that love is not like this magical category that we automatically all know what it is. I don't think that you can have love without standards, right? Like, so
stoning gays is like outside the realm of loving them.
Well, hold on. You love your wife, right? If you were married, I don't know if you are, but if you were, you would love your wife, right? So, but I mean, that carries with it certain that carries stipulations, right? I mean,
Like what?
well, like you're not going to sleep with her mom, probably.
Right.
Okay. So love has standards. It's not something that's completely subjective. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that you can't invent a love that's totally subjective. It always requires some kinds of standards and limits.
Right. I think not stoning gays is a good limit. I think not punishing people is a good limit. There's a difference between justice and punishment. Justice is when someone has wronged someone, you do what you can to make the victim whole. Punishment is, I'm just going to cause you pain because I don't like what you did, even though you don't have a victim. That's sick. That is
no. Well, there are actually, I would say there's cases where people become depraved to the point that they're a danger to society. This is what we do when we lock up people and then force everybody to pay for all these inmates. I'm talking about violent offenders. I'm not talking about non-violent.
When you say society, you're creating another excuse for violence. Well, there's this artificial construct of society that is my subjective grouping of people based on whatever subjective standards and geography and culture.
You said you didn't want your neighbor flashing his dinghy at your kid, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So I'm just talking about a kind of whatever's out there, right?
Right. So a threat to society is an excuse to do violence against a peaceful person who's a threat to no one. If they're an immediate threat to someone, like a raised fist, like a verbal threat, like standing in someone's way, they're a threat to a person. You can't really be a threat to society, like to an abstract, concept.
That's why there's weaponized culture. The military studies weaponized culture. You were in the military.
Now you're using like your metaphors, and we're trying to talk about like logical, concrete issues.
No, there are objective documents of psyop studies from the military on weaponizing culture.
So
it's a real thing.
All right, so I think we're gonna move on. We have so many questions from weaponized culture. When you say that, like where does weaponized culture come from? Who pushes that? You just like the military uses it, right?
Well, I gave you two examples. I could give you the example of weaponized culture through mass migration, the Kelly Greenhill's paper that the Navy did a study on. I could give you the example of Bernard Berelson's document on the promotion of homosexuality as a form of weaponized toxic culture. You could look at Michael Aquino's document on mind war, psi war. These all talk about the weaponization of not just culture, but even the biosphere.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to move on to we have a ton of questions on YouTube.
A lot of banter.
Is there a lot of
back and forth
chatting going back and forth?
Comments on the YouTube feed. So, but I picked a couple off here for each of you.
Go ahead.
As an experienced YouTuber, if you want to lose your mind in a hurry, the best place is any YouTube comment section. Just start reading. It won't take you more than a few minutes, and you'll be out of your head completely.
That's how I usually.
That's exactly how I entertain myself.
Verify purchases. Go straight to the comments.
You don't need drugs. We don't need any drugs anymore. Just you want to get messed up, just start reading YouTube comment sections.
It's like cancer sometimes, man.
All right.
Hey, Adam, I have a question. Before we go, do you believe that a society of individuals could voluntarily contract, which, by the way, when I brought that up before, I wasn't talking about a social contract. I said an incorporation. So if they voluntarily incorporated, could they all decide to punish homosexuality with death in their society?
Only on a private property basis. So it would be just like for me to say, if you come on my land and you start doing some gay stuff, I'm going to kick you off. And if you voluntarily contract with me to say, I'm subject to your rules, and if I break your rules, then you're able to, violate my body, and it's sort of a, based on a consensual agreement, then, hypothetically you could, but I don't see that being very realistic. And what's more realistic is that you can ask someone to leave.
No, wait a minute though. But there are Islamic societies that do believe that about that action.
Yeah, and they're wrong.
Right, but you admit that it is okay if you voluntarily agree to punish it this way. It's arbitrary.
If you're on someone's private property, and part of the condition of being
Who
on their...
Who decides that? I'm talking about these voluntary people. Why can't they voluntarily decide to punish this in their group that they have incorporated by their own voluntary free will?
Well, when you say in a group, that's fine, but where are they? They must be on some property or claiming some land, or at least claiming immediate right to use some land. And so as long as anybody's like free to leave, I mean, why would a gay person enter into such a contract that says, by the way, if I do anything gay, you can stone me?
Because because some vices are committed by individuals within that kind of a society. So what I'm saying is that
when you say in that kind of a society, that does not exist voluntarily. You're all talking about forced collectives. You're talking about someone saying,
no, this is a voluntary collective. This is a group of people who are agreeing to punish this action this way. Right,
but we were talking about immediate present reality. There is no such place on Earth really, except, I don't know if you go to Antarctica maybe, or some uninhabited island where you even have that possibility. So right now, pretty much every single human being, 99.9% of the population lives under a government, lives in a forced collective where they don't have a choice.
But your argument was that you don't agree with the God or the theology that I would present because you find that morally repulsive. And I'm just pointing out that theoretically, hypothetically, it could happen in your view.
No, I find it logically inconsistent. But the concept of all-powerful, all-knowing being is in itself contradictory. You cannot be both all-powerful and all-knowing.
Well, that's a different question from the question of how, in a voluntary decision to punish homosexuality, that's wrong. Is it wrong or not? If they voluntarily decide to do that.
If I say, hey, if I'm on your property and I do this, I give you the right to do this to me, then it's fine. But
what if all of those people decided to punish it together? Like they decide we're going to make a circle, right? If it happens on Joe's property, we're all going to have a circle, right? And we're going to punish the homosexuals.
Right. So among those private property owners, they could come up with a collective agreement. They could come up with a contract and say, we're going to put signs around the outside of all of our properties. Gays stay away. We really don't like gay people. And if gay people come onto our property, we're going to shoot them. But if you say we're going to go hunt down gay people on their property, then I would suggest that they defend themselves. I mean, to quote the great libertarian bumper sticker philosophy, I just want gay married couples to be able to defend their marijuana plants and mushroom cultivation and LSD laboratories with guns that they bought on the internet with Bitcoin. I mean, it's like they have that right as individuals, and they're going to defend themselves. If you really want to go after them, I hope that those gays are very well armed.
Right. Well, that was actually a straw man because I didn't say that we were going to go after them. I'm just asking about the possibility within your view, which you admitted.
Going after them is an implication of your question because you're saying within our group, we decide that we are going to punish them. Well, if they're in your group voluntarily, it's fine. If they're outside of the group, you are now going after them.
So it is okay to punish the gay within that group if they voluntarily decided that they wanted to do that. That's all I'm asking for.
Wait. Okay. Real quick. So basically, Jay, what you're saying is that if a gay guy signs a contract if he does gay stuff in front of this group, then it doesn't make logical sense that he would sign a contract that you could murder him if he does gay stuff in front of this group.
The point of the argument is just to show that with the principle of voluntary association and creating contracts that way, you still have the same problem that Adam was trying to put upon me. And I'm saying that Adam may not like it if they do that, but in his worldview, he can't say that it's wrong for that group to do that because that's their free decision to do that. How can you say it's wrong?
As long as membership in that group is completely voluntary and consensual.
Right. I mean, it wouldn't be wrong. You could be completely prejudiced against anybody or but what's going to ultimately happen is you're going to be isolated from market. You're going to be pushed out of the market it'd be silly to be be way.
For not liking gays,
the market is not like the God, right? I don't believe that the market is God. So what? Sorry, what?
For not liking gays, Christians sure end up talking about them a lot.
Right, another sort of straw man fallacy of association here. Which,
all right. Before this gets
up the homosexuality.
So we got some questions. Let's move on to that.
Hetero. you can see my exes. They're hot.
Okay, so let's move on to the question portion. You got some questions, Nick?
Yeah, I've got a couple. I'm trying to write a few down here. They're like, I asked, and now they're like ramrodding them to me. So I got a couple here. I start out with Adam. So someone said, if Kokesh's society is so timeless and natural, why has it never existed before in a more natural period?
I never said it was timeless and natural. I said the principles behind it are timeless, and that it is natural that we evolve to that state. So that's sort of like the fallacy of, because it's never been this way, it never shall be this way. And it's the equivalent of asking the question, about slavery. Well, who's going to pick the cotton? Well, we've never had a society without slavery, so we're going to have slavery forever. We can evolve past our current state of a violently centrally controlled through government kind of society.
Okay.
We will.
All right, Jay, this next one's for you. It says, does Jay seriously believe that the authority of the church from, quote, historical records is ethically and logically justifiable?
Absolutely.
Anything else? Just
No follow-up?
yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
Fuck yeah, I do. I got another one here. It says, Kokesh, is Adam high on weed?
No.
Okay.
I'm high on life.
All right. Well, all right, Jay, I got another one here. It says,
yeah.
I got to admit, I know this is going to turn into some, doping scandal, but I did snort some freedom before this debate.
Uh-oh.
So I just.
Uh-oh.
all right, Jay, one of the commenters here asked if you could define evidence, and then went on further. There's some other stuff. I didn't write it down fast enough, but said, do you rely on evidence to support your claims of the church and what we've been discussing here?
Yes. I mean, if you believe that a logical argument is a form of evidence, yeah. And so when I gave a transcendental argument, I mean, I've got talks and articles you can find at my site where I deal with that in more detail. But so if you're talking about like empirical evidence, I mean, it really depends on what the question is. Like if you're asking, did Jesus historically exist? There's certain, references that you would make to Tacitus or stuff like that. I mean, if you're talking about, I guess it just depends on what they're talking about. So in my view, there's like logical arguments and there's also empirical arguments. And I think both are relevant.
All right. Most of this stuff's just coming through pretty quick now.
Okay.
It's just a bunch of banter, some arguments between listeners. So, I don't know if we want to keep. If you have questions,
you guys will have closing statements here shortly. I know we're 1 hour and 45 minutes in.
Let me just, if I may,
go ahead.
This has been great, and Jay, thank you. This has been awesome. It's been a lot of fun. And I'm really excited about what we're creating with this as a record of the clash of these ideas. I think this has been awesome, and the spirit of your engagement in this has been great. And Mike, the moderation has been perfect. So thank you. And I'm happy if we would do a bit of a lightning round. If there's some questions from the audience, I keep going with this for as long as they're interesting. And then I think we've both really we left everything on the mat, so I don't know if there's a heck of a lot. We don't need too much time for closing statements, but I think this is going great.
So okay, I'll have a question, and this is going to be like a simple question for both of you. I'm going to ask Jay, and then Adam, you can answer the same question after Jay answers it. And it's really an elementary question, but I think that when people one of the hang-ups that people always have is when talking about anti-state, they tend to get caught up in the idea of a utopian society, right? Like the idea that an anti-state creates a utopian society, or they think that's what the end goal is, right? And with a state, right, the goal is to make it's sold to everybody that we're trying to make life better for everybody, right? I mean, on the premise that you are, right, for all the people that are in that state, that's what's sold to them. So Jay, what is the end goal of the state as far as in your means, or right? Yeah.
because I believe in Orthodox theology or Orthodox Christian theology, I would adhere to our traditional principle, what's called Byzantine or Symphonia. And in the Greek, that just means that there's like, if you've ever seen that symbol of the double-headed eagle, that's not originally a Masonic symbol. It's actually a symbol from Byzantium, which means the balance of the spiritual and the temporal. So the state's goal, in our view, is merely to be the judge of things relating to justice. It's a protector, a guardian, all these kinds of things that we, in a microcosm view, the father of a family to do. But that would, I mean, I could give you like articles or statements and stuff like that that fill out like exactly what the position is. But I mean, anybody who's like familiar with history kind of has probably an idea of what like the traditional Byzantine idea of Symphonia is.
Okay. And Adam, from the anti-state point of view, what is the ultimate end goal?
Well, just to be clear, it's not the anti-state so much as the pro-freedom, as in pro-nonviolence, as in pro-respect for human rights, as in pro-peace, pro-love, and the objective of having a society with a higher standard of ethics, that is, we only use violence against people when they're an immediate physical threat to someone. So it's the ethical society, the happy society, the productive, peaceful, harmonious society that is the objective of applying these universal principles of human relations.
Okay. Super. What, you got more questions?
I got one more here for Adam. It says, how does Adam see his view coming into practical existence? Would it be through a violent revolution, or how do you see it?
That's a very good question. And as I see this as an evolutionary process, the achievement of this really should be evolutionary, not revolutionary. And because what we are seeking is a nonviolent society, the means of achieving it cannot be violent. So what we can do is, through the political process, develop the consensus to dissolve governments from the top down. As you mentioned, Mike, this is why I'm running for president in 2020 on the platform of the peaceful, orderly dissolution of the entire United States federal government, which would be a good first step. But we get rid of the federal government in the United States, we have an incredible opportunity to lead the world forward in freedom once again, as we did with the first American Revolution. And in this sense, continue the process of localization all the way down to the divine individual. You can get rid of the federal government, then the state governments, and then counties and cities can either be transitioned to private property collectives and maintain their basic functions, but without this, ridiculous false premise that you own property in a controlled area when you pay property taxes, which really makes you a renter. And we can get down to the community level, where we can displace government entirely with the kind of nonviolent systems that render it obsolete, that achieve the specific stated functions of the state much more efficiently, much more effectively, and without the violence.
Okay.
Maybe more pop-up.
Yeah, I didn't have any more. I mean, there's so many questions going on. But Jay, so let's. I'm going to ask you this then. So the magnitude of the state, how big is it? How big does it need to be? I mean, earlier you talked about monarchies. That ultimately means that there's no private ownership, really, right? Then that, or what level of state? No, there would be private ownership with a monarchy. You're not a king's subject.
I mean, are you familiar at all with history?
Well, maybe not. No, enlighten me then.
I mean, do you really think that nobody under a monarchy had private property?
Well, so if the king came down to him then and said, "Actually, this is mine," at that point, I mean, do they say, "Oh, no, it's actually mine, sir, and I will defend it against you"? He's the king, right?
Have you ever read a history of any like civilization or society with monarchy?
I'm asking a question in a monarchy, right? Like, I mean, because are we arguing pure? I'm trying to say is if it's a state.
I understand. I'm sorry. I just thought it's a ridiculous question. But
okay. Well, what magnitude of state?
So let me answer the question. No, there's not the state is not God, and in fact, it's if you look at the history of the Bible. Mm-hmm. And the introduction of monotheism through the Israelite tradition, and then what we get in Christianity. Take the Roman Empire, for example. The Roman Empire cast out girls because they didn't think they had a whole lot of value, and so they were kind of like the untouchables that we see in like India. So Christian theology provided a principle by which those were human beings that had value. So the state is not God, and in fact, for the first 300 years of Christianity, you have millions of people, we believe, who were persecuted by the Roman emperors because they thought they were God. So the history of the Israelites is grounded in monotheism, and that kings and emperors aren't God. Okay. And we continue that tradition, we believe, by saying that the state, kings, and emperors aren't God. So Adam and I would agree with that principle, I think, that like the state is not God, right? But what we do think is that through our belief system, which is pretty, I understand they're tall claims, I understand that. But we do believe that there's been a transformation of kingdoms, and that this was, we believe, was actually prophesied in the Bible. So like Daniel 2, Daniel 7, many chapters in Isaiah, Isaiah 2, or Isaiah 9 talks about government being transformed and the kingdoms of the earth actually converting to the things that we believe. Now, even, I understand this is a long answer, even liberal scholars date those texts a long ass time ago. We still think that, amazingly, like, those things seem to have happened, right? I mean, you have the nations converting to this tradition that originally is the tree coming out of Israel. So we would say that's a pretty good testament to the accuracy of the predictions of those prophets, especially Isaiah. Okay. Anyway, so the state is regulated by the religious principles that we hold to, and that's what you've actually seen in history, is the transformation of the state itself. Okay. Now, does that mean that every time the state has always been that it's never overstepped its boundaries? No, not at all. We'd never say that. But okay. So there's always going to be this kind of struggle. Okay, so I'm going to follow up with this real quick. So basically, then it's not state in general. It's your type of state, right? Like what you've defined here tonight. Now, what happens to other states that don't fall in line with your type of state? So I would say that there's a good case that's made in the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin, where he talks about the possibility of multipolarity. So I don't have a problem. We don't have a problem with multipolar states. By that, unity within multipolarity, right? So you can have cultures that they may not deem it appropriate to have a monarchy. I'm not saying that everybody has to have a monarchy. They might be organized in a different way. They might have a tribal chieftain or something. That's fine. We don't have any problem with that. So it's not that there's a single sole form of government that's like the one true form, but rather that there is basic principles, we would say, from our theology of hierarchy, and that's always going to be there. You're always going to have some kind of hierarchy. Even, I would say, in a voluntary society based on non-aggression principle, you're still going to have a natural form of hierarchy.
All right, I got here halfway through you guys' debate. I tried watching some on the way here on my phone, and this kind of goes to you, Adam, because I know you and Mike kind of have the same views on government, and like what's the time frame on something like this? Like how do you see this happening? Is this something that you're planning for your kids? Is this something you think is going to happen in your lifetime? Is it your kids' kids? Because I mean, a lot of the stuff you guys talk about is like real abstract to me, and it doesn't seem, maybe I'm just being pessimistic, but this doesn't seem obtainable. You know what I mean? And
quite to the contrary, it's actually inevitable, and it is somewhat difficult to predict with any kind of scientific certainty the timing on this, because it's based on these accelerating trends. I describe this as the asymptote of the human experience, the point at which all these curves go vertical. I know the asymptote is the point at which they never hit, they never converge. But from the point of our puny brains looking up, I mean, we can't even comprehend. Most people have no idea, how to explain Moore's law, or can see how humanity is progressing and have a sense of all the technology and all the R&D labs in the entire world, how much things are accelerating right now. But if anything, I'd say that we always kind of lag behind in the reality of social organization and the paradigm that defines that. Paradigm shifts. We lead society, or society's paradigm leads government. What the people believe is always ahead of the time of government. And so I would say that right now we're at this point where people are questioning government more than ever before. The movement of people who understand freedom as an ethical concept based on the non-aggression principle, based on self-ownership in the United States, is somewhere between 0.5% and 1% of the population. But if you look back historically in our movement to the 70s, when it was really first codified by Rothbard as anarcho-capitalism and the formation of the Libertarian Party in 1971, you can see that we have been growing exponentially. I would say, we're on course at this point to be doubling every year. And it's easier and easier to wake people up to the reality and the nature of government as a violent, coercive monopoly that's about ripping you off. It's about exploiting you. And it's harder and harder for government to get away with what it's gotten away with historically. Just now, in the age of the internet, we already see this huge acceleration in accountability. It's incredible. We have yet to even realize half of the implications of the internet. The impact of the internet is still being felt in the halls of power throughout the world. So I would say that we are on the verge of a critical mass kind of tipping point. And we don't have to convince everybody to get this. What I see, what's happening with my presidential campaign, if anybody wants to check it out, Kokesh, fornotpresident.com. And I got to warn you, my computer might be about to die on me, so this might be my wrap-up right here to say that we are working on growing the movement and then being able to pitch to the mainstream localization. That, hey, if government, if you don't believe that you should be free, if you don't believe in the concept of universal nonviolence and respect for individual rights, and you feel that you need to be governed, you need someone violently, forcefully imposing upon your will, would you rather be governed locally or by someone in a distant capital? And we see how much better off we're all going to be, how much more prosperous we're going to be when government is small, localized, and close to the community. So by doing that, we're going to see so many improvements in society. People are going to be rushing to go, well, heck, we eliminated the federal government, and now we just have state governments, and things are so much better. This is amazing. Let's keep going. Let's get it all the way down to the individual. That's where this is going. And it really might be, the tipping point that we come to in the paradigm could be right around the corner. The way that my book is getting out has just been incredible over the last couple of years. The way that people are taking to it as a way to share this message has just been incredible. I do believe that it would have to be at least several decades, 2 or 3 decades, to fully process the institutional adjustments that go along with this paradigm shift. But the paradigm shift is happening right now. It could be in the next decade or two that we really come to that tipping point, and then maybe just 2 or 3 more decades before we get to experience the institutional changes towards a more free society.
Thank you. All right.
Is that your sign off?
I guess that's all I got. That's my closing remarks. I'll let Jay have the last word.
Well, I want to say I agree with Adam on anti-war, and I hope that he is able to deconstruct the American system, because it is a dangerous imperium that I think is wicked. So I actually will vote for Adam to deconstruct this existing power structure.
Look at that.
Just in my closing statement, I'll just say that I think that people are going to be looking not just at the future, which I do agree with Adam that the internet poses all kinds of possibilities. I think that people are also going to continually be looking to the past to find tradition, to find meaning. And I think that the kinds of things that are going to be offered in the future will be something like what we see in Russia. I think Russia gives us a lot of hope for the future, precisely because it is based on these sort of Byzantine traditions that I've been talking about. But it's not just a relic of the past. It's also something that gives man an eschatological hope for not just making this world better, but also eternity, right? And so looking beyond markets, looking beyond these kinds of things, what is the meaning of your life individually, not just in terms of, success and having sovereign citizenry or something like this, but after you die? And these are big questions. And I don't think that the hope or the promise of merely monotonic, as it's called, expansion, right? So just meaningless expansion or technological advance is in any way going to solve the problem that man wants more out of life. He wants to live forever. And I think that the reality of the Christian philosophy in terms of Orthodox theology is what gives man hope, not just for temporal future, but for eternal future. And I believe that it can be philosophically and logically defended.
All right, fantastic. Hey, so we lost Adam. He fell off, and he wanted to let you know, Jay, that you're welcome to call him and text him anytime, and you guys can have discussions. I'll give you his number after this, but.
Okay, and I would also say if you want to read my book, which deals with philosophy and metaphysics and all this in relationship to movies, you can see this poster right here, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. If you go to Jay's Analysis, you'll get a signed copy directly from me. So please get it from me and not Amazon.
Jay, it's been a pleasure. Adam, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Adam. I thought it was really good.
I do think that you guys have a lot more in common than what people would think out there.
I agree with most of those principles. I just think that we need a basis in like theology for them. That's my argument.
We love both of you on the Spearhead Transmission. We definitely do, and we know that you'll be on as future guest for sure. And
we'll trap you in a group text and send nonsense to you.
Yeah, you'll definitely be in the group text that gets nonsense, Jay.
I love nonsense.
I know you do. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jay. Thanks for
thanks, guys,
for making your case, and I hope you become rich and famous from this.
I don't know about all that, but all right. Thanks, guys, and thank you, Adam, and you guys have a good night.
All right. Bye-bye.